Okay. So we're discussing, of course, trusting in God, having bitachon, and a fundamental at the core of trusting in God is the realization that everything that happens in our life is actually from God. And by way of example, and I think it's very important to articulate this, and I hope all of you will find the language to express this as you talk about what is going on in Israel. Everything that Israel has, thank God, amazingly pulled off in the last couple of weeks are all achievements that are only made possible through God. And God makes them possible when we create the vessels for those things to happen. And that's what Israel has been doing for many, many years by gathering intelligence, by creating the means to gather intelligence, so that through that God sends them intelligence that no other country actually can gather. And the reason why is not because we are more shrewd and smarter than everyone else, although that may be true. But that's not the reason why we have more intelligence. The reason why we have more intelligence, as I heard someone say, that America had, I think, a $7 million bounty on the head of a particular Hezbollah leader, which means America really wanted this guy killed. And he's the one who who's the one who killed the over 200 American Marines. Yet America didn't kill him, right? They didn't have the means. They didn't know where he was. Israel did know where he was. The reason why Israel knew where he was is because Israel, we are the people of God, and God sends unique and special abilities, and we really, in other words, blessings through us. But this is the key distinction to always remember that this is all from God. And when we do, then when we know that and know that thoroughly, right, then we begin to look at our lives a little bit differently because we understand we're in a relationship with God, and then we relate to God the same way we would want a spouse to relate to us, or we should relate to a spouse, and that is, what are their desires, what are their needs, and am I being there for them? And that is the same, that works the same way in our relationship with God. So it can't be like an isolated thing where we praise God and then go about our lives as if God doesn't exist. Um, but it's got to be where God is fully integrated in our lives, of course, to the best of our ability. And we, of course, grow in baby steps slowly in that relationship. So we bring this into what we just spoke about, learned earlier last week, and that is that when it comes to our wealth, we look at it the same way. Why do I have what I have? May God bless all of us with wealth. We should all be materially wealthy. We've had discussions about that in the previous classes about the value of material wealth, even though it comes as a great test. And the great test, of course, is the belief that I achieved this, I made this, I earned all of this. And while it's true that we put in great effort in order to earn what it is that we earn, however, our efforts in and of themselves would never earn what we have without the blessing of God. So that's the reason why one who feels superior in some way because of their wealth, even if we are a person who feels superior, but we do a fine job hiding it in what we call false humility. So we know how to play the part well to make it as if, no, it's not me. But the question is what we really feel. So when we really feel that we are better, we're superior, etc., that is actually a sign that we don't truly trust that everything comes from God. When we truly trust that everything comes from God, and again, I'm talking in extremes, but it's really a continuum of us more and more and more recognizing that is God and less me, more God, less me, more God, less me. So that seesaw of more God, right? God goes up, I go down, not down in a negative way, but in a diminishment of the belief that it's me. What happens is the person that starts evolving is this magnificently humble person. They really have no sense of superiority over other people, which is really what humility is, superiority. That we don't have a sense of superiority. I just know that God has blessed me. When God blesses me, I have great responsibility to take God's blessings and to use them the way God wants me to use them. And that's also what a humble person does. But when I think it's my own achievement, I ask myself what I can do to make myself even greater. Maybe I can buy a third yacht because now people will be even more impressed. Oh, you own one yacht, I own three yachts. Um, that's all. Again, the first sign that we don't have a proper perspective on it. So now we're talking about, we began last week on page 148, proper attitude in social interactions. This is a little bit interesting because I think that most of the people I know seek to have social interactions. And I believe that human beings are social beings and we all seek really social interactions, whether we are more of a quiet person or an introvert or a very a very outgoing person, but still everyone, it's just a matter of how we engage in our social interactions. But we all need want social interactions. However, there are situations, interestingly, one of the greatest pains that people suffer from, and I believe there are studies on this in America, which is really fascinating, because we're not living in some isolated place, but yet one of the greatest pains that people suffer from is loneliness. And loneliness, I may have mentioned this last week, is not so much being alone. It's a feeling of loneliness despite maybe being surrounded by many people. But what he's talks about over here is when it comes to social interactions, and again, he always breaks things down in very clear, like scientific, in a very clear scientific manner. So he divides things always into categories, which helps in in breaking down the ideas. So he says when it comes to social interactions, there are basically two states a person can find themselves in. One state is a state of loneliness, which means that I am alone. Someone finds themselves with no family. It could be at different stages in life, right? It could be someone, I when I was reviewing this, I was thinking about the Rebbe. The Rebbe did not have any children, right? And so what was his perspective on that? And the fascinating thing is that the Rebbe blessed so many people with a blessing of children, and they in fact had children after he blessed them, although they hadn't had for many years. Yet he himself didn't have children. One of the great teachers of Hasidic philosophy of this past generation of blessed memory, he passed away just a few years ago. His name was Rabbi Yoel Kahn. He's a brilliant mind. He showed up in New York, I think in around 1950 or maybe 1951, right when the Rebbe's leadership had begun, as a young man from Israel, whose father, of course, was a Russian Hasidic Jew, and he had a brilliant photographic memory, and he was the one who would listen to the Rebbe's talks hours and hours on end, and then lead the team that would write down all of the talks, which you had to do if it was on Shabbos and Yom Tov, which most of them were. You had to write it down from memory. So he was a brilliant man, and he did not have any children as well. And he asked the Rebbe countless times for a blessing. And one time, as I heard, the Rebbe once told him, "What should I do? I also don't have children." Because the Rebbe giving someone a blessing of any sort was because he saw on high that there is access to this blessing that this person has. However, there are certain blockages. So when you do a certain mitzvah or you strengthen a certain area of your relationship with God, that opens up the blockage and the blessing flows. However, sometimes the blessing isn't there. It's not destined for this person to have that blessing. And so even though this man was a very, very special and dear to the Rebbe in a particular manner, yet the Rebbe could not offer him a blessing because apparently it wasn't available to him. So how does a person look at their life then? And that's in some way, how I'm identifying with what he's writing over here on page 148, where it says dealing with loneliness. So let's jump up one paragraph higher, the middle paragraph. A person cannot escape from one of the following two scenarios. Either he will be estranged, living alone, or he will live amongst his family and close ones, right? One of the two. So he first deals with loneliness, and I'll bring up different aspects of how to look at life, and this will help us I pray that none of us are lonely, and that we have different people in our lives. Well, I mean, we all have each other, so that's already, we're not, thank God, entirely lonely. Um, but if he's estranged, living alone, then he should connect with God at the time of his loneliness, and he should rely on God in his state of estrangement. I may have mentioned last week as well that there were individuals who came to the Rebbe and told the Rebbe. In particular, I'm thinking of a woman who came to the Rebbe and she lost her spouse, her husband, and she told the Rebbe that she feels very lonely. And the Rebbe's comment to her was, and again, I just want to say that this comment can sometimes sound harsh, but from the Rebbe to this woman, the woman understood very well what the Rebbe was, where it was coming from, what the Rebbe was saying. So I just want to put that in context. And the Rebbe said, "How can a Jew feel lonely? God is always with you." So interesting, because the Rebbe lived through a few years of in 1948, in 1988, his wife passed away, and he passed away in 1994. So he lived for 6 years alone, and he really actually lived alone because even though he was surrounded by many Hasidim, but when you're a leader of that stature, you really are. We call it head and shoulders above. So you really are alone. There's no one really to that you can speak to. That's a peer of yours. Um, so what do? You rely on the fact that this is the state that God wants me to be in now, and I'm going to focus on the opportunities that this state offers me and use them out to the fullest, because clearly that's what God wants me to do. So it's a way of thinking, right? Where we don't begin to look at ourselves as victims of circumstances. We begin to see ourselves as being placed in places by God for a distinct purpose. And we have to just ask ourselves, what is this purpose? What are the benefits of this situation that now I can put to very good use? That's the question. So the page 149, in order to comfort himself, he should dwell on the fact that the soul is also estranged in this world. So first of all, he acknowledges how difficult it is for a person to be alone. That even though you have a divine perspective on it, and that you trust that God put you in this situation for a purpose, but still it's very difficult. So one of the ways that you can comfort yourself is to realize your soul, everyone's soul is very estranged in this world. Why? A soul is a piece of God. It's used to a divine environment, and here it was put into a body which is very self-oriented, which dominates it, right? Like the soul, unfortunately, has much less expression than the body does. We try and change that over our life as much as we can, and that all the people of the world are considered as strangers in it, as the verse says in Leviticus, "For you are strangers and temporary residents with me," which is one way of understanding it is that we are temporary residents in this world. By the way, this is a great perspective to remind ourselves of, that our life in this world is a temporary residence. There's a well-known story with a man who visited the Maggid of Mizrich, who succeeded the successor of the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, and he saw that the Maggid of Mizrich had very little furniture in his house, and he said, "Rabbi, where's your furniture?" So he said, "I'm really, this is just a temporary location. So, I don't have it very furnished." So he said, "What do you mean by it's a temporary location?" He says, "My primary location is really where the soul is going to be after this world. God just put my soul in this world for, 70, 80 years to get some things done. So I'm not going to invest. I'm investing in my furniture in the next world, not in this world." Again, it's aligning our minds. And when we do this, we actually make choices very differently. We begin to value things differently. Things that get other people so upset are really, they're not too big of a deal for us. Okay, would have been nice, but it's okay, right? Because we're looking at things from a very different perspective, and all of that's what we're trying to, what we are accomplishing in all of these conversations. So, furthermore, he should comfort himself in the following manner. He should think to himself that even all those people who have close ones in this world will, in a short amount of time, revert to being strangers and alone. And neither a person's close one nor his child will be able to help him then, nor will they be able to connect with him. In other words, if you turn to the next page for a moment, and then we're going to turn back, but eventually everyone dies. If he lives a long time, then he will outlive his family members and find himself alone. Alternatively, he could die first. Any advantages that a person gains from having family who can help him and provide solace are only temporary. It's like the woman, 99-year-old woman that was asked how she, what's secret to such a long life? She said, I don't have any enemies. So he said, how is it possible that you don't have any enemies? She said, I outlived them all. It's one way to. So let's look at an important comment on the bottom of page 149, where it says the soul is also estranged in this world. The soul originates from and is part of God, and is part of a part of God, and it comes down into the physical and materialistic world for a divine purpose. That is why are you here? You are here because God sent your soul into this world for a divine purpose. That's the reason. This is by the way, people spend many years trying to answer this question. What am I doing here? You just got it very simply in a moment, right? You are here to fulfill a divine purpose. Okay, now you have to figure out what the divine purpose is specifically for you in your situation. And that's actually not as hard to figure out as people make it out to be. And if someone reminds me after the class, I will send to you a discover my purpose worksheet that I created for bar mitzvah boys, and you may be able to benefit from it as well, because it's a worksheet that we have to revisit every few years as our circumstances of life change. So then our focuses need to change. So now, considering that the primary and distinguishing quality of man is his soul, then each and every person is a certain and in a real sense, a stranger. The soul of man is a fire of God. That's a verse. Just as a flame is always drawn upwards, having an innate desire to separate from the wick and ascend upwards, so too the soul of man has a desire to leave the body and reunite in its root and source, the living life. Blessed be he. The soul is incarcerated in the physical body. By the way, did we do this last week? No. Okay. I'm getting a yes and a no. We did do this last week? Okay. I'm getting two opinions. So I guess some of us need a review for sure if we did do it. And if we didn't do it, then we should definitely be doing it. Okay. Anyway, so the main point is that just like a fire always moves up, when I said this, I sort of had a memory. When the fire moves up, so too our soul is always moving upwards towards God. What's holding the soul down? The same thing that holds the flame down. What holds the flame down is the wick and the wax, the material part of the candle, is what holds the spiritual part down. So it holds us down. Reflect on the following. I have a soul that is literally a part of God, and my actions affect this piece of God within me. Therefore, I need to have mercy on God, who is in exile within my body. For the purposes, I should reunite this piece with its source through the study of Torah and fulfillment of mitzvahs. Every time we fulfill a mitzvah or we study Torah, as we're doing right now, we're studying Torah, we are actually connecting and reuniting our divine self with God and releasing it from some level of imprisonment. Now, consider how happy you must be that you have been given this opportunity to remove your soul from this exile and reunite it with God. For an analogy, imagine being the catalyst behind a prince who has been kidnapped and has been rotting in jail to be reunited with his father, the king. So too should you be happy with your lot. You're reuniting the prince with the king, so to speak. Okay, furthermore. Okay, now let's go to the next comment. All the people of the world are considered as strangers in it. All inhabitants of the world, even those who consider themselves of great lineage, are essentially described as strangers. Our sages of the Talmud explain why the creation of man differed from the creation of other species, and why, among other things, man was created as a single individual, unlike other living creatures created in pairs. Let me emphasize this point and also make it very relevant. Rosh Hashanah is the anniversary of the sixth day of creation. I know some of you know this, I want to make sure you all know it. It's not the anniversary of the first day of creation, it's the anniversary of the sixth day of creation. So happens this past Shabbos was the anniversary of this first day of creation, the 25th day of Elul, and I found it fascinating that it was on this day that one of the greatest representations of evil in the world was eliminated. And in my understanding, that was a recreating of the world in its new messianic state, which of course didn't begin yet, but was a major step towards in that direction. And we have to capitalize on the moment, the momentous times that we're living in, to make sure we achieve our ultimate goal. And so Rosh Hashanah, and the reason why the Rosh Hashanah we celebrate on the sixth day of creation is because the crown jewel of creation is the creation of man. Now, when God created man, otherwise known in Hebrew as Adam, that's what the first man was called, the Talmud tells us that Adam, interestingly, was not a male. But Adam, this single being, was actually an androgynous being, which was one side male and the other side female. Today, we only show up as either male or female. But then, this first being, only this first being, God created as both male and female in one being. And then, we know the story, God split them and made them into two. And now you had Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve, two people, which is really strange. Why would you make them androgynous as one being and then split them into two? Just make them in two beings. If you want a male and female, get it right the first time, so to speak. But there's a specific reason why God created man as a single individual. And that's the point that the Rebbe here in this footnote is explaining. One of the reasons our sages declare is that it was God's design that the human race, all humans everywhere and at all times, should know that each and all descend from the one and same single progenitor. We all come from the same individual. It's not like there was two people, now we can fight. Oh, I came from Adam, you came from Eve, or whatever the story is, right? No, there was one person. We all originate from a single being. So that no human being can claim superior ancestral origin. Hence, we would also find it easier to cultivate a real feeling of kinship in all interhuman relationships. In other words, someone may say, oh, my grandfather was, my grandfather was. My grandfather was? I'll tell you my grandfather was. My grandfather was Adam. Handmade by God. Oh, yours also is. Every human being is. So there's no superiority when it comes to lineage. And we don't get caught up in that. That's the point that he's trying to make. Now there's value. I do not want to dismiss the value of our specific lineage and the ancestors that we may have, that we've had very special parents, grandparents, great grandparents, whatever it may be, right? But at the end of it all, we all come from the same place. So now let's go to we're going to go to a very interesting subject here on page 150. He's going to talk about ascetics. Ascetics are people who try and escape reality or the physical world so that they can live a very elevated spiritual life. This is very much what Buddhism, I believe, aspires to. This is not what Judaism actually aspires to. So we're gonna have to understand the balance here, but also understanding that sometimes God puts a particular person in a state where they are meant to live a more abstract life, clearly, and some people are meant to engage far more in the material world. You can see that from the different roles God gives people, right? One person may be a person, we'll say, who is a businessman. He's got to engage in the world. And then another person may be a person that studies Torah all day. So clearly that person is a little bit, is far more removed from the world than the former. So after this, on page 150, he should think about the fact that due to living alone, still talking about the guy who God gave him circumstances that he's alone, that due to living alone, the weight of those people's loads, responsibilities, and needs has been removed from him. I think often about the fact that when we have, when we are living in the context of a large family. For example, I have a bunch of kids at home, right? And it's hectic and it's busy and this and that, so sometimes you think, oh, one day it's going to be quieter, right? Some of the kids will be they'll be away at school, more of the kids will be away at school, more of them will be married, which I learned doesn't make it quieter. But anyway, it was a nice fantasy. But right, it's going to get quieter, right? And then what happens when it's quiet? Oh, yeah, I miss all of the noise, right? Because we're always living there. We're not living here, right? So living here is, what is God giving me right now? What are the circumstances? What are the circumstances of my life right now? And I live that. That's what I'm going to live. So now I have a family. I have a bunch of kids in the house. It's noisy, whatever it is. This is my context, right? And then when it's quiet, look at the benefits of the quiet. And how do I maximize the quiet? Instead of, oh, I miss. No, God's giving me this more alone time. So now the weight of people's loads, responsibilities, needs has been removed from him. Less laundry to do, less distraction, less people demanding my attention, right? He should consider this removal to be one of the kindnesses of the Creator to him. And it's a kindness from Hashem that he's giving him the opportunities now. For if he is a person who pursues the worldly matters and its needs, his work will be much less of a strain on him if he does not have a wife and children. Again, we're not saying that one should aspire not to have a wife and children. He's talking from the context of a male because he's a man writing this, right? But it could be the reverse as well. But the point is not to say that that's what we aspire to. If the circumstances of God are such that he set me up in a situation at a certain point in my life that I don't have a spouse, I don't have children or children at home, right? So then I should look at the opportunity that God is giving me, the direction God is leading me in. It emerges that the lack of wife and children is the cause of his rest and for his own good. Why is God doing this to me? We should always assume anything God does to us is for us, not against us. It's not punishment, it's God's kindness. Okay, always assume that. You should always assume anything that God does is a kindness. Now, sometimes we can't, it's very hard to see the kindness, but it's always a kindness. If he is a person who seeks the matters of the world to come, spiritual matter. So if you're a businessman and that's your duties in this world, because that's your circumstance and what you would do well, so then you have more time for that. If you're a person who's focuses on the world to come, spiritual matters, then his mind will, without a doubt, be more unoccupied and free to pursue these matters when he's alone. Then if you have family with which he is busied himself, and you have many other people around you, it's much harder to be focused spiritually. This is why the ascetics would flee from their relatives and houses to the mountains. Why do ascetics, people who try to live these abstract lives, leave their wives and their children? They don't want distraction. Not that we should pursue that, but from them we can understand that you can only be elevated spiritually when you don't have a lot of distraction. And how do you know if God wants you to be an elevated spiritual person? Based on this, if God gives you a house full of children, clearly that's not supposed to be your focus now. Obviously, we're supposed to be as spiritual as we can, but only in that context without negating our duties there. Similarly, the prophets at the time of prophecy would leave their places of residence and seclude themselves so that they can free their minds to ponder, fulfilling the obligations imposed on them by the Creator. Prophets were known to do this as well. The reason why is you have to understand what it means to be a prophet. To be a prophet means, what is a prophet? A prophet is someone who God communicates with usually, for most of the prophets, in somewhat of an abstract way. Usually that prophet is in a state of sleep, or when prophecy comes upon them, they lose bodily control of themselves by the overwhelm of the divine energy that is resting upon them, and they get certain messages from God. Now, how does a person open themselves up to such messages? I'm going to tell you how, in a very, very general sense. I'm not a prophet. I don't believe, I will not be a prophet, and you should not anticipate being a prophet in your life either. There are hardly any prophets today, actually. So a whole discussion about whether there are prophets or not. today, but there used to be thousands and thousands of prophets in the land of Israel. The way a person receives prophecy is by a person training themselves to be a person who focuses their mind on the divine for very long periods of time. And when a person trains themselves to do that, they also have to be in a state of happiness. There are a whole bunch of criteria to be a prophet. I'll just tell you some interesting things because I think you'll find it interesting. You have to be in a state of happiness to receive prophecy. You can't be in a state of sadness. Interesting. That's itself it deserves a whole conversation in and of itself. And that's why it's so important for us to be in a state of happiness to the best of our ability all the time. And a prophet actually needs to be well off financially, like materially, interestingly. But anyway, when a person reaches that, so in order to be in that state, to be able to focus on the divine for long periods of time, you can't have things distracting you. Right? You can't have little kids pulling at your hem saying, I need this, I need that. Because you just won't be able to focus, right? That's all beautiful, but you won't be able to focus. So if someone knows that they're meant to be a prophet, or they arrange with their spouse or their family that this is what I'm dedicated to, and this family supports them in this, and in fact they are the right person for such thing. So what do? They would leave their places of residence and seclude themselves so that they could free their minds to ponder, fulfilling the obligations imposed on them by the Creator. How do they know this was an obligation imposed on them by the Creator? Because when God designs you with an ability, then you have to live up to that ability. If your husband comes home, right, or some other man you hear say that the reason why I'm away from home so much is because I'm working on becoming a prophet, a little tap on the head may wake them up to reality. But there were times that this was relevant. Just a moment. Let me see in the footnotes here. Yeah. So let's go to, you see where it says bottom line on page 151 on the bottom half of the page. It says through a challenge a person is raised to a higher level. Oh. Well, actually, let's jump a little bit higher. Where the second line where it says the last word on the line, where the second last word is ultimately. You see that in the second line, ultimately? In the commentary on page 151, second line. Ultimately, it is not good that man be alone. In Genesis, right in the beginning of the Torah, it says in chapter 2, it's not good that man be alone because that is not the purpose of creation. Rather, the purpose is I will make a counterpart to him. That people marry and live together. That's really what God commands us to do. We have an obligation to do that, right? So through this challenge, what challenge? Through the challenge of marriage. And if you don't find your marriage at all to be challenging, I'd love to speak to you to learn the secret, right? But I don't. Not that marriage is a burden, right? But it challenges us, right? It challenges us. The person and the soul will be raised to a much higher level than it was before creation. If one approaches marriage properly, then marriage makes you a much better person. Why does it make you a better person? It challenges you. And you have to now be a real mensch, not just smile when you walk out of the house to the person in the supermarket. Now you got to be a mensch with someone who's intimately, engaging with you. And then you become more of a mensch. And that is the challenge. Why does God give us the challenge? Through a challenge, a person is raised to a higher level. So that's the value of relationships, even though he's not focusing on that now. But if God puts a person in a circumstance where they're not in an intimate relationship, clearly that's not what God wants them to focus on now. Now, if they're a person that is a potential prophet, which would have been more relevant in times bygone, then it's because God says, possibly because God says, I want you to be in an intimate relationship with me. Right now, they don't preclude each other. You can be a married man, and Moses was the greatest prophet of all, and he was married, right? I think all prophets were married. Yet they found the balance, and especially when I believe when a spouse knows that they are married to someone who's of a prophetic level, then they easily give them the space that they need to attain that level. Okay, so historically we find a group of Jews who requested this ascetic life. The Torah tells us that the tribes of Gad and Reuven asked to remain in Transjordan, where they would have ample land to tend to their flock and not settle in the land of Israel. So we're told when the Jews, after 40 years in the desert, they were going to conquer the land of Israel, and suddenly two tribes come to Moshe and says, we want to stay in Transjordan. We don't want to cross the Jordan into Israel. So Moshe says, what? We're finally getting to the Holy Land. You don't want to go into the land of Israel? Why wouldn't they want to go into the land of Israel? So the deeper spiritual reason why is because they sensed that they were a people who were meant to live a more ascetic lifestyle. Shepherds are a little bit more, they go in the fields, they spend time in the fields, and that's why our patriarchs were all shepherds, and people who are of divine nature, more of a stronger divine disposition, very often become shepherds because they spend time alone. So that's what they wanted, because they said the land is fertile here and we can be shepherds. The interesting thing, ironically, is that these tribes were great warriors too. Fascinating thing, right? They were great warriors. So they said to Moshe, we will go and fight on the front lines on behalf of our brothers and sisters who are conquering the land of Israel, the other 10 tribes or 9.5 tribes, and then we will come back and live here. So it's interesting that you have warriors and ascetics in the same person, right? They are the same people. One of the greatest warriors that ever lived for the Jewish people was King David. Interesting. King David was one of the greatest men of God that ever lived. I know the whole story of Bathsheba. If you know that story, maybe that's bothering you, but he was still one of the greatest men that ever lived. Greatest divine men that ever lived. And he was a warrior, one of the greatest warriors that ever lived. Do you see how these two go together? A man of God can accomplish the greatest things in this world. Why? Because God is accomplishing it through them, and they know that. They know it as God. That's why it's so important to have this perspective. That's why I believe that the most important words that Netanyahu said after he commented on the killing of Nasrallah was he had for 3 minutes just to encourage the citizens of Israel. And the very last words he said was, Be'ezrat Hashem, with the help of God, Yachad, or Biyachad, together, Natzliach. I believe those were his words. We will be successful. The first key words was Be'ezrat Hashem, with the help of God. Second most important thing is Biyachad, unified. We can have different opinions, we have to be unified. If you have the help of God, and you know that it's from God, and we're unified, we will, without a question, there's no hesitation whatsoever, we will be successful. Okay, so continuing over here, in the desert, the Jewish people had their material needs provided for. When the Jews were in the desert, they had manna from heaven, there was water from the well of Miriam, protection from the elements through the clouds of glory. Encountering the land of Israel would mean having to plow and sow. Now going into the land of Israel means we're going to have to work all day. You got to work, right? A farmer in those days is pretty much what most people did. You got to work hard to get your food. And the tribes of Gad and Reuben asked Moses to spare them this challenge. They said, let us live an ascetic life. Let us live in an area where it's easy to pasture, a place where we will be in the fields and nothing will disturb us from serving God. Ultimately, the Torah tells us that Moshe acquiesced. However, there are a few interesting points to explain here. This was an exemption for only 2 tribes, plus half of the tribe of Manasseh, whereas the majority were commanded to enter the land of Israel. The purpose of creation is to make a dwelling place for God in the lowest of worlds. To accomplish this, a Jew must confront the basest challenges of creation, and he must find God and serve him in that space. Therefore, it was not enough to remain in the desert and serve God there, or even to remain in the place of pasture and serve God there. Rather, a person must go into the land where there is a struggle and a challenge and serve God in that setting. Therefore, most of the Jews were commanded to enter Israel. Basically, what he's saying is, primarily our mission as a people is to engage in the world, not to be ascetics. And that's the reason why most of the Jews actually went into the land of Israel, to engage with the land, with the material world, and to engage with it with a divine perspective, which is the way we bring the divine into the material world. Now, even these 2 tribes that remained in Transjordan were only allowed to remain in Transjordan after promising to lead their brothers in battle to conquer the land of Israel. This gives us insight into why Moses allowed them to remain. Clearly, it is understood that in order to accomplish a mission, there is a need for guidance by leaders who are immersed in the goal. So too, the mission of making a dwelling place for God in this lowest world needs guidance from Torah leaders and those who occupy themselves with the ways of God. This was precisely the request of the tribes of Gad and Reuven. Let us remain in the land without challenges, a land where we can focus and connect to God. However, we will not distance ourselves from the mission of the Jewish people, and we will lead them in their mission. We will be their beacon and shining light, and we will be their Torah guides and show them how to achieve their goals. See, if you ask, tragically, there are many Jubus. You know what a Jubu is? A Jubu is a Jewish Buddhist. If I may say these words, God forbid. Because Buddhism is not Judaism. Buddhism is a spiritual pursuit, but the spiritual pursuit is really an escapism. And it's about achieving some state of happiness, nirvana. But Judaism is about engaging in the world, not escapism at all, and being happy because I am fulfilling the purpose God put me in this world for. It's a very, very different approach. So we're not trying to be spiritualists. We're trying to be divine people. And being a divine person is a person who has a divine perspective in a material world. That's why Jews actually enjoy life. That's why we enjoy life. Because we enjoy the material world with a divine purpose. Whereas other people, every piece of enjoyment they have from this world, they're feeling guilty about. But we know that God put us here to engage in the world with a divine purpose. In the words of the Talmud, Rabbi Shmuel opined that a person must conduct himself in the ways of the world. Okay, we're going to stop here actually with the footnote. Let's continue now on the top of page 152. We're good, everyone? Any questions? Any rebuttals? No one's upset about anything I said?
No, I actually have a question about what you
Yes.
said way earlier on about
Yeah.
Rosh Hashanah on the sixth day, and I just wanted to understand. So everything was set up then to then. It seems like a little out of order to me. You'd think that maybe just what is the reason? Yeah. Why
Great
the sixth
question.
day? Yeah.
The reason is, if you take on a business venture, and you're excited about some project, like I'm going to open up a knitting shop because I love knitting, right? So I love knitting, so I'm going to open up a knitting shop. And you ask the person, what's your goal in opening up the knitting shop? What's the purpose? Well, I love knitting, so I want to share my passion with other people, right? I'm not a business person, so I can't say this factually, but something tells me that this purpose is really not clear. And the chances are that this project is not going to be successful. Because when they open up the business, they're going to find out that running a business is very different than just enjoying knitting, right? And maybe people aren't as excited about knitting as you are, and therefore it's not so easy to get people in. It's definitely not easy to cover your expenses, et cetera, right? So it's very important whenever we do something that we are clear about our purpose. What is my goal? Maybe my goal is that I should, have 20 customers every week. Okay, now I have a clear goal, I can achieve my goal. But if I just love knitting, so I'm going to share knitting with the world, that's not a very good business plan. Why? Because my purpose is not clear. So really, nothing really comes to completion until you actually know the purpose and until you have the possibility of the purpose being fulfilled. So all of creation of the world, day one, day two, amazing things were created. Light, darkness, sun, moon, animals, everything was created. It was amazing. The whole magnificent world was created. But until the human comes to the world, there is no a possibility for the world to fulfill its purpose. Only the human being can fulfill the purpose. So the real creation of the world, the culmination of the creation of the world, is really considered to have happened on the sixth day, when God creates man. And that becomes Rosh Hashanah. So we're very significant people. We're also very dangerous. Humans are the most dangerous beings God created. Why? Because we actually have impact Unlike everything else is instinctive in the world. Everything else just runs according to its design. Human beings are given free choice, which makes us powerful and makes us dangerous. And that's why we see crazy things going on in the world. We also see powerful things going on. A group of women at 9:30 a.m. in the middle of a weekday, right, are all sitting and studying about God. It's very powerful. Okay, that good, Shoshana. Fantastic. Good. Now you can walk into Rosh Hashanah with greater meaning. Yeah. Okay, so on top of page 152, an example of this asceticism that is designed for certain people is Elisha. Now, you probably heard of the prophet Elijah. Elijah the prophet. Elijah the prophet's successor was another great prophet whose name was Elisha. So as you know from the story of Elijah and Elisha, about whom the verse states, 12 yokes were before him, and he was with the 12. Elisha was standing with yokes, right? You know what a yoke is, right? If you're standing near a yoke, you're probably on a farm. 12 yokes, you're probably on a big farm, right? That's where Elisha was. And suddenly Elijah comes to him and basically lets him know that I am appointing you as a prophet. The verse continues that Elijah threw his cloak over Elisha as a hint that Elisha too would wear the special cloak that only prophets would wear. Since Elijah subtly hinted to him that he would be a prophet, Elisha understood him and said in the following verse, "Please allow me to kiss my father and mother, and I will go after you." And the following verse states, and he followed Elijah and ministered to him. So what happened? He left home. Why did he leave home? Because he's becoming now a prophet, and the prophet has to focus. And the focus can't be done on the farm, working the land, and it can't be done when I'm home with my family. So these are very unique people whose purpose is, in fact, to be alone. As soon as Elisha realized that he was to become a prophet, he took leave of his family. The story is told of an ascetic. Now he's telling us a different, separate story now. Not necessarily a story we should learn from, but it sends us a message. And we'll see, we'll understand it. The story is told of an ascetic who went to a certain country to teach its inhabitants about the correct way to serve God. He found that they were all wearing the same colored clothing and ornaments. Their grave sites were next to the doors of their homes, and he did not see any women among them. When he asked them about this, they replied, the reason why we all wear the same colored clothing is that it should not be distinguishable between the poor and the rich, and so that the rich will not end up arrogant and boastful about his wealth, and so that the poor will not despise himself. And he should think of his life on this earth in the same manner as when he will be underneath it, after his passing. It is said about one of the kings that he would mingle among his servants and cannot be identified among them because he conducted himself humbly in regard to the clothes and ornaments that he wore. As to the reason why we placed our grave sites next to the doors of our houses, it is in order that we should take rebuke from it by being ready for death and to prepare for ourselves the provisions that will provide us to the place of rest. Basically, that our lives should be more spiritually focused, which is what we take with us to the next world, and not materially focused. Let's go to the next page for a moment. That which page 154, that which you noticed, that we separated ourselves from our wives and children, you should know that we designated a city for them nearby. When one of us needs something from them, he goes to them and takes care of his needs, and he then returns to us. We did this because we saw the stress, much loss, great exertion and toil that would come to us as a result of being in the proximity to them. And the relief from all of this, due to our distance from them, enabling us to be free to choose to engage in the matters of the world to come and to detest the matters of this world. Their words found favor in the eyes of the ascetic who had visited them, and he blessed and praised them for their practices. Now, although it is, of course, unfortunate not to have a family, a person should comfort himself with the fact that from a certain perspective, he has it easier both in the material and spiritual. I want to just emphasize something. which we'll see hopefully in a footnote in a minute, we're not encouraging people to do what these guys did. Okay, this is not the Jewish way. It's just the point that it's showing that if God puts someone in circumstance, if God puts someone in circumstances that we are alone, then we can have the perspective of these people that by divine circumstance, I am alone. So I can use this to be more elevated than a common person can be. But someone has a wife and kids, actually, this would create many halachic issues, obligations that one has to his family that this would be very problematic with. If you actually look at the bottom of page 154, where it says we separated ourselves from our wives and our children, the Chassam Sofer, he was a great rabbi, the chief rabbi of Presburg in the 1800s, and a man whose writings we study diligently until today. He is a great halachic authority in Jewish law. So he explains that this type of service is not constant. There is a place for this type of divine service when the person is immersed in prayer and Torah study. At such time, he should not be disturbed at all by family. During the part of the day that you're praying, that you're studying Torah, don't be disturbed. You start the class, right? You turn off your phone. I'm not available now. I'm praying, I'm not available. But then there's plenty of the other day that you're available to everyone. At such a time, he should not be disturbed by his family. He should be dedicated to God. Then there are times when the commandment is clearly to involve the family, such as joy in festivals, where the verse explicitly commands, and you shall be joyous in your festivals, you and your sons and your daughters. At these times, he clearly should not be separated from his family. Rather, he must include his family in his divine service. Okay. So now we are up to dealing with family and friends. Okay, now we're going to do up to what I hope is the circumstance of all of us, to whatever extent it is. And that is, the author now discusses how a person who has a family and social network should have bitachon as it relates to his interactions with them. If the person trusting in God has a wife, family members, friends, and enemies, then he should rely on God to save him from the burden usually associated with being involved with them, and he should make efforts to meet his obligations toward them, and to take care of their wants, and to do so wholeheartedly. He should avoid doing anything that will cause them harm. Instead, he should engage in the means that will bring them good, and he should be loyal to them regarding all their matters. That number one, you pray to God that they not be a burden. Meaning, what that means is, God forbid, your kid wakes up sick, you have to bring them to the doctor. It's a whole half a day hassle, right? You pray to God not to have those hassles. You pray, and you just pray to God that you should be able to meet your obligations towards all of the people in your life in a wholehearted manner, where you're providing them with the good that is expected of you to provide them with, and that you're loyal to them. So let's look at on the bottom on the commentary. He should avoid doing anything that will cause them harm, meaning he should avoid harming his enemies. So this commentary says that the harm is talking about enemies. Rather, a person should show them the proper way of the Torah. It's very interesting that what happens with enemies very often is, first of all, I want to make this comment, which just hit me when I was reading the text above. The Rebbe once told one of his shluchim, one of his emissaries, he asked him if there's anyone in town that doesn't like him, is unhappy with him. And the Rebbe said, because if there's no one that's unhappy with what you're doing, then you're not doing too much. In other words, when someone is a force of good, there is automatically opposition. There's opposition from people who are jealous of you, so they find fault in what you're doing. There are people who are just not good people, so they don't like anything good happening. Anything that good happens, right? So actually, the reality of life is that you have people who don't like you. It happens. I'm not saying that we should aspire for the time when we have many people who are disliking us, but the fact that there may be a person or two that dislikes us is not necessarily a sign that there is a problem. Okay, people have problems, and when people have problems, sometimes they have a problem with you. Now, it could be you have to assess whether you're just doing something wrong, whatever it is, of course, right? I'm just saying that good people can have enemies. The Rebbe had a lot of opposition in his life from many devoutly religious Jews who were fiercely opposed to certain things that he did, and that's fine. That was, I believe, to the Rebbe, that was only a sign of the fact that he's actually making an impact. So, what do you do with such an enemy? So, some people, every enemy becomes a personal fight, right? How dare you, and this and that, right? Or it's just having compassion on their misguidedness, and hopefully, finding a way to show them the right path. That's what he's saying. So, Hillel teaches, be a disciple of Aaron, love peace, love the creatures, and bring them close to Torah. The use of the term creatures here is as if to say that even those who are distant from the ways of God, from the way of God's Torah and his service, for which reason they are simply called creatures, their sole virtue is that they are creations of God. A person must pull him close with thick cords of love, and perhaps through this he will be able to draw him close to the ways of the Torah and divine service. Embrace him, love him, and if he does not bring him close to Torah, he has still fulfilled the commandment to love your fellow Jew. So the Alter Rebbe says that when you see a person, a Jew, who's not living up to his Jewishness, embrace them, love them. Best case scenario, you're embracing and loving of them will give them the openness to look at being living up to their Jewishness better. And at worst case, you will have fulfilled the mitzvah of loving your fellow Jew, which we have an obligation to do for every single Jew, even though it may not have followed into greater results. So the next comment, instead he should engage them by means that will bring them good. The Zohar states, come and see, this is one of the most powerful stories in the Torah, my opinion. Come and see how Joseph acted toward his brothers who sold him as a slave. Not only did he not take revenge by harming them, he acted kindly and nobly toward them. Very courageous. This attitude is the path of the righteous, and in reward for such behavior, the Holy One, blessed be He, will have mercy on you constantly, in this world and in the world to come. You want God to have mercy on you in this world and the world to come? Then when someone wrongs you, do exactly what Yosef did. Know that any wrong that I experience is because God wanted me to experience it. No one's able to impose wrong upon me. And the fact that this guy is behaving such a way means he needs to be taken in and embraced, and I'm going to embrace him. Essentially, don't personalize the wrongdoing of others against you. And that will leave you free with this divine perspective to still embrace them, not to make yourself vulnerable to their aggressions or wrongdoings or bad character at all. Never do that. But still to embrace them, and hopefully that will give them the openness to actually grow. Let's finish this reading. The Alter Rebbe of Shneir Zalman of Liadi writes that when hatred rises in a person's mind, God forbid, toward another, or jealousy or anger or a grudge, he immediately removes this thought from his mind and does not entertain it. Just don't dwell on it. On the contrary, he prevails over his emotions and treats this person with kindness and shows an abundance of love. Not only does he not take revenge, but on the contrary, he repays the offender with good, as we learn from the Zohar. In the story of Joseph and his brothers, the good and beneficial path of God is apparent. The sale of Joseph, which brought him down to Egypt, was not merely intended to begin the Egyptian exile, which led to the receiving of the Torah, but his descent to Egypt was intended to alleviate the hardship of the Israelites. And this is what he says to his brothers: God has sent me ahead to save your lives. You would have died of hunger. It was not you who sent me here, rather it was God. God sent me here through my brothers selling me. If not, God would have sent me here a different way. But this is why God wanted me to come here. So I'm going to blame my brothers for having gotten here? No. God sent me here. Anything that happens to me in my life is from God. But what about the wrongdoing of my brothers? Terrible thing to sell your brother into slavery. That's their business with God. They should not have been the agent of God to do something negative. But that's their business, not my business. Where I end up is because that's where God wants me to end up. Otherwise, I would never end up there. I only end up where God wants me to end up. This truth of Joseph is the truth of every hardship. Although the good is not evident in all situations, it's nevertheless a plan that comes from God, who only does good. That's why you always have to assume That when God's doing something, he's doing it for me, not against me. Is nevertheless a plan that comes from God, who only does good. Therefore, every offender should be treated and repaid with good. Indeed, the commandment to avoid causing harm and promoting good is to friend and foe alike. Okay. We are going to stop here. We're sort of in the middle of dealing with friends and family, and we'll continue. So God willing, next Monday morning, we will be having class. And then we're going to be breaking until after Sukkot. Okay, until right now it's November 18th, a few weeks after Sukkot, depending on whether I will be going to Israel or not, which has not been determined yet. So we'll see. Wonderful, everyone. Shana Tova. Everyone should be blessed with a happy, healthy, sweet new year. God should answer all of your prayers and fulfill all of your wishes for good, with excellent health, with Yiddish nachas, with abundant material abundance that you use for spiritual purposes. And I look forward to continuing our studies together in the new year. All the best, everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi Weinstein. Beautiful.